Hi, this is Max with The Way of the Elbow Rolfing. I'm here with another variation on the theme of gravity. This is continuing a topic from the last several videos. In this video I was hoping to offer something more of an experiential approach to this theme of gravity. And so I suppose that I would, as I'm speaking, I would invite anyone who's watching this video to try to correlate the images and the words that I'm expressing. Try to correlate that to an experience in your physical body. And so, to begin with, I encourage everyone to try to experience the sense of your limbs and in fact your whole body, even imagine all of every atom, every particle in your body having some kind of relation with the field of gravity. We experience the field of gravity, we experience it as somatically, we experience it as weight. And so try to sense that your body has weight. And there's a way of, how would I say, a large part of the tension that we carry around has as its origin and its cause, has a sort of a tacit or unconscious resistance to that weight. And I'll pick up and explain a little bit more what I mean later in this video. But let's just imagine for a moment that we are somewhere like the equator in the equinox. In other words, the sun is directly over our heads. It's in the very top of the sky, shining straight down on us. And imagine the kind of shadow that it will cast. Basically, it will shining straight down. In other words, it's shining in kind of perfectly parallel or in perfect alignment with the field of gravity. You can see the field of gravity is basically, you could, to discover the field of gravity, you would more or less draw a line to the center of the earth. And you can see that many plants and flowers, on average, plants and flowers, they're orienting to that same vertical axis. You could picture a tulip rising in spring. Well, it's rising perfectly in kind of antithesis or polarity to that downward pull of gravity. And we're trying to imagine that, but we can't. It doesn't have we don't see gravity. We feel gravity more. We see sunlight, and so that's why I'm using the metaphor of the sunlight to help us picture what kind of shadow, what would be the shape of the shadow that your body casts on the earth beneath you. You can just picture that, imagining the sun again is directly overhead. And then if you can connect that image with a second image, and it's basically the shape of your feet pressing against the earth. This would be, of course, different if you're sitting. This would be, but the principles are no different, right? And so then if we think about the relation between the kind of the shape that your body is, the shadow that your body is casting, and the shape of your feet, we realize that in some way your feet serve as, in one way, they're a base of support for all of your mass. But in another way, this is saying the same thing. What the base of support does is it's actually a point of transmission. And so it's a point at which the mass and the weight, the force of your body from gravity, that force is transmitted into the earth. Yeah. And so it's already many things come into play, because we've said that any kind of chronic tacit resistance to the pull of gravity, to the weight of gravity, will lead to chronic tension. But it's also that if we don't have a clear, crisp transmission of our mass, we're kind of handing it off to the earth. We're basically receiving support from the earth through our feet. And so just as I'm speaking, I encourage each of you to try try to connect these words and these images with experience, somatic sensation in your body, and you have a sense that in some way your feet are they're allowing your weight to flow down into the earth, and at the same time, in some way, they're receiving support from the earth up through your structure. I would like to connect this idea of gravity and our degree and our harmony of attunement with gravity. I would like to connect this to a topic that I introduced in earlier videos, talking about the foundational principles, the foundations of Rolfing. One of them that I mentioned was adaptability, and this was the notion that the body is like a verb; it's continually changing. And I suggested that a way to understand tension in our muscles, it's to see the tension as a symptom and not a cause exactly. So in fact, the tension in our body is something like a diagram of habits and patterns of tightening that we propagate through time. So the tension in our body, it's a map or a diagram of how we move, how we live, and how we conduct ourselves. And then I will just add that a great deal of this, of these habits of tightening, they are relative to the feeling of gravity. They're relative to the feeling of weight. So that's to say that a great deal of our chronic tightening, it's a sort of refusal to surrender to the experience of gravity or of weight through the body. We can imagine, again, to draw on a metaphor from earlier videos and to connect it to an image from this video. Imagine that the weight of all of your structure, it's that every atom in your body, imagine the weight is somehow gathered together, and then it's seeking to flow out into the earth. Your feet are like the mouth of a river, so to speak, a river of weight. And then we can picture these places of tension or tightening, picturing them like eddies or backwaters, even places where the river ceases to flow, places where the water pools up, so to speak. Again, this water is representing the flow of gravity through our bodies. And so I hope those images, and if you can in some way just allow the images to connect themselves to experiences in your body. This has a way of, in one way, clarifying or bringing order, organizing the sensations that we're experiencing all the time, which are so fleeting. But in some way, if we have a picture or an image to go with them, we can begin to discern patterns in them, in those sensations that are always just coming and going, fleeting. We can begin to discern patterns in them that would otherwise escape us. That we can discern order in them, which otherwise we might not notice. It also has a way of anchoring new learning, is to give it a picture or a concept. Right? Once we have an image to something, it can be a mnemonic device that helps us to recall the actual sensation of it. Right? And so by connecting the images that I've tried to offer in this video, I'm thinking of the river flowing through without lets or hindrances, and also the sun casting the shadow and that representing your weight, and then how that shadow relates to where that shadow is being basically supported through whatever happens to be a base of support. It's like it's being distributed then into the earth. If those two images, if they can be connected to somatic experiences. It's much easier to recall those somatic experiences together with the image. The image gives it something like a handle, to use another metaphor. So having an image, it gives a handle to these somatic sensations that are much more, in some ways, nebulous and difficult to recall once they've passed. The last thing that I'll say in respect to gravity is the more successfully we, in some way, surrender to gravity, and surrendering to gravity means basically just recognizing what's already the case, which is to say that we live in the field of gravity, and precisely for that reason we often cease to notice it, we cease to experience it. But for exactly the same reason, it can have significant consequences, just because it's so ubiquitous and always there, that if we cease to notice it, we run the risk of sustaining a disharmonious relation to it. So that's why something like this can serve to bring our attention back to something that might otherwise have sort of drifted beneath the threshold of our consciousness, and then we can make any kind of corrections that might be necessary. So the last thing that I'll say is, the more successfully we are able to surrender to gravity, to attune ourselves with what is already the case, the more we will also notice something that is kind of the opposite to gravity, the polar opposite to gravity, and it's whatever we call that power, which accounts for the fact that we don't just become a puddle on the earth, but rather that we go through the world in a vertical condition. In some ways, this is the polar opposite to gravity, and the more we experience gravity on the one hand, the more we will be able to differentiate it from this verticalizing power. And so that's probably a good place to stop in this video. And as always, I hope that something I said that it can be helpful and can put you can find a way to put it to use in your own life. And so on that note, I will conclude, but not before wishing each of you the very best. And so farewell until next time from Max.